Thank you for coming. Welcome. My name is Jay Lawrence. I'm a board member of the Atlanta Press Club, and I'm on the Student Outreach Committee of the Press Club. And as is Bryce McNeil, many of you may know Bryce. Also, Alice Murray is on there. So this is our third edition of what we call Get the Scoop. And it's we did it at GSU once before, we went to KSU. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator in just a second, who's going to take it away. The Atlanta Press Club is the largest press club in the country outside Washington. The only press club that's bigger is the National Press Club. And so we have almost 600 members. And so you guys are the future. All of you are the future. You know, and I'm so excited to have our panelists who are given their time today. So if you're interested in getting involved with the press club, it's real easy. You can find out about the events. Some of them are oriented to beginning journalists, some of them are not. And just get on our mailing list. Just on the sign-up sheet, just if you haven't already, just check that. I know you get a lot of emails, but please feel free to do that. And what we're going to do in terms of format today is John is going to get us started, and then we're going to turn it over to you. So be thinking about questions that you want to ask our panelists so we can have a discussion. Then about 12:30 we're going to break for pizza. So, and then the panelists are going to stay. You'll have more of a chance to talk one-on-one with them. But I want to thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to John Hendry. John's the lead graduate student assistant in the GSU Journalism Writing Center. And take it away, John.
All right, thanks, Jim. Well, hello, everybody. I think I know some of you I don't know. But thank you for coming today. We've got a really great panel for you. We've got some great journalists here to talk to you today. We've got Stephen Fowler from Georgia Public Broadcasting here. He works on All Things Considered, which is a major show on NPR, our local NPR affiliate. We've got Ciara Frisbie from CNN's data team here to talk to us today. And then we've got Rikki Klaus from Channel 2 Action News, our local ABC affiliate. Before we get started with any questions, I'd just like to kick this over to the panelists and ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves, please.
I guess we're starting with me. All right, I'm Stephen Fowler. I graduated from Emory University last year with an interdisciplinary studies degree in communications. I work as the producer and fill-in host for All Things Considered, which is the afternoon drive time show for NPR at Georgia Public Broadcasting, which is the statewide NPR affiliate. I've been working there since July. I'm a lifelong Atlanta native, and I work on 88.5 FM, which is the Atlanta NPR affiliate for Georgia Public Broadcasting. So everything I do is Atlanta related. Weather, traffic, news stories, social media, you name it. And I was in the first class of the Georgia News Lab here at Georgia State.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. All right. Well, my name's Ciara Frisbie. I graduated from Georgia State in December. Currently work for CNN's data team, but my position's a little bit interesting because I am technically a associate producer, but I'm also freelance full-time for them. So anything to do with investigative reporting, I'm pretty much involved in. Work with a lot of data, obviously, being part of the data team. I have written pieces for the AJC. I have interned at Channel 2 with Jody Fleischer, and I was also a part of the Georgia News Lab the first year around, so.
Thanks, Ciara.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rikki Klaus, and I'm what's called a general assignment reporter at Channel 2 Action News, the ABC affiliate here in Atlanta. And so I could cover any given story on any given day. It could be breaking news, it could be political, it could be something that's developing. It could be investigative in nature. So across the board, a wide variety of stories. And I graduated from the University of Florida before you guys did in 2009, and I'm from Vero Beach, Florida. And I really like journalism, and I think it's a really important part of our society.
Thanks, Rikki. So one of the things I really appreciate about our student body, and this is a compliment to all of you, is you are very practical people. In classes that I've had with journalism students, you're always asking, what does a day in the life of a reporter look like? What are the things that I'm going to be doing out in the field? So the first question that I want to pose to our panelists today is, what do your jobs look like on a day-to-day basis? And I want to kick this over, Rikki, to you first. Tell us about what a day looks like for you. How many assignments do you receive? How do you process those? And then what does a week look like for you? Because I have a feeling that your job is a lot more irregular in terms of hours than some of the other jobs that we'll be talking about today.
So at Channel 2, the reporters are required to pitch enterprise stories. So that means a story that you're not going to see in the newspaper that really nobody else is covering. And that often requires work outside of actual work. So I go into work at 2:30 in the afternoon, but I'm often working prior to that, making calls, making sure that the story that I'm pitching, that the players who I would be interviewing can actually be interviewed that day. You know, what time works for you? And so I think in some jobs that might sort of be like a producing role, like what story are you going to do? Who's going to talk to you? And the logistics of setting that up. So at 2:30 I get into work, and then we have our afternoon meeting straight away, and we pitch our story ideas, and sometimes they like them and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, you got to call up the people and say, I'm so sorry, maybe we could do it another day, or, you know, we're not going to be able, there's this breaking news that I have to go to. Or if they like your story, then great, and, you know, you go do it. And perhaps you've shot your story and you're writing the elements, and then, oh no, there's breaking news, and so everything you've done that day, maybe it's more evergreen, so it can be saved for another day. Or perhaps you just have to sort of start all over. So an example of this would be last week I went to one of the government buildings, the Department of Revenue here. We were doing a story about tax fraud and new ways that they were using to mitigate tax fraud. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, Rikki, we have to send you to Gwinnett County. There's been a nearly 2-year-old baby who was hit by a car and who has just died. So we go there, we sort of scrap the other story, maybe we can do it next week. And then we're inside of a family's home, and the mother is sort of losing it because this is her only daughter, and you know, she was just going to turn 2 in 5 days from now, and you know, it was just a very weird experience. And so I'm crying, and you know, there's like this very emotional side of reporting, or there can be this I'm going to the Department of Revenue, like cut and dry sort of side, and you never really know. And then all of a sudden there's this crazy weather, and so after we go live at like 11:15 p.m. on this other story, oh, by the way, we need you to check out these 2 spots where trees are down in 2 different cities. So by the time I got home and went to bed, it was 3 a.m. So that speaks to the irregularity of the hours. Yeah, did I answer the question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I think that really
I
shows
forgot what it was.
you have to stay on your feet like this whole time. You don't have a regular set of tasks that you have to accomplish. Every day is a new set of challenges and a new set of problems that you have to solve.
Right, and I guess sort of the point I was, trying to drive home is that you really have to be flexible, and you have to adapt, and you never know where you're going to be at what time. You could be, you know, up in North Carolina or Tennessee, or, you know, you could be going to bed really early in the morning, or it's just very irregular, I guess I'd like to say.
And that sounds pretty exciting as well. You
It
know,
is.
Having to constantly rise to the challenge and figure these things out sounds, it takes a lot of skill, I think.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Rikki. Let's kick this over to Ciara. So what does a day in the life look like for you as
Okay.
part of the data team?
Okay, so it's a little interesting. So I am not on my feet as much as Rikki is. I tend to work on projects that either last 6 months to sometimes 2 years. It just depends on the nature of the story. But she did bring up a good point about kind of cut and dry in some scenarios, or being emotionally involved. And I think that with some of the content that I work at CNN, which I can't really discuss because they are investigative stories, I have to play the role for both. And I think that's important to know as a journalist and to be prepared for. So no matter where you go or where you end up after graduation in the professional field, you're going to have to play that role. You're going to have to do both. And so I usually get into the office about 8:45, 9 o'clock in the morning, but when I say that I'm working from that time until 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, I'm really working until that time. I don't usually take any breaks, but I do a lot of research. So I look at a lot of court records. I look at a lot of police reports. I do a lot of backgrounding on people. Some of my favorite stuff to do is to go onto Facebook, actually, and research people. That's my favorite thing. So, and eventually all of the things that I do will contribute to bigger stories that will either go online for CNN.com or might be on air. It just depends. So,
during the course of your research, are you looking at records exclusively, or do you ever have to do any sort of statistical analysis?
So I do work for the data team. I'm not really on that side of things. So I do a lot of kind of like deep dive backgrounding.
Yeah.
That's kind of my role as an investigative reporter and as an associate producer for CNN. So really kind of like the foundational work that will build up this story later on.
Cool.
So.
Thank you. All right, so let's move this over to Stephen. Stephen, what does your day look like? Now, radio is a different beast, again, than television or than CNN's multi-armed apparatus. So tell us a little bit about what you do every day.
So live radio is fun, and it is a different animal, to be sure, because live radio will move on whether you're ready or not, whether you say the right word or not, whether you mispronounce Atlanta or not. And so there's a lot of, there was a big debate that people were tweeting my host the other day saying, you said it Atlanta, it's Atlanta. And then other people were saying, no, it's Atlanta, and don't say it Atlanta. So there was this big debate back and forth. So I think in one break she actually said Atlanta and Atlanta in the same one just to appease both. But usually my show runs in the afternoon from 4 to 7, and usually it starts in the morning. At 9:30 we have our morning meeting where the morning edition team, who is on from 5 to 9 in the morning, says this is what we have today, this is what we see, this is what's developing, and we'll figure out from there who covers what, if it's something that we need to make a call on, if it's something that we can just find the copy stories. I spend a lot of time reading other news outlets for what the news story is. So say I'll read a story that Rikki posted and figure out how to turn a TV spot or a long form print piece into about 30 seconds of concise, accurate broadcast level radio writing. Most of my day is also spent, we produce a daily promo, so we have to figure out what we're going to talk about tomorrow, sometimes before things even happen, and then produce that into a 30-second promo that you'll hear throughout the day. So Thursday, I produced a promo for Friday that aired all throughout the day of this is what we're going to talk about, this is how we're going to do it. So on Thursday, we knew that the Atlanta City Council was proposing an ordinance that would reclassify marijuana punishments from jail time to a fine. So I had to produce that, write it in 30 seconds, get tape from somebody to say something about it, find a source to talk to get tape for air, and then do all of that together. And then most of the afternoon is spent finding the news, writing from the AP Newswire, WSB, AJC, the Atlanta Business Chronicle, because we have a newscast at 4, 4:30, 5, 5:30, and 6:30, and you have a minute and a half or a minute and 45 seconds to tell all of the day's news in a way that you can understand it and in a way that people know what's going on. And that happens whether you do it or not. And then during the show, I actually run the board for the show. So we've got this giant board that has microphones for the host and the NPR news feed, and I've got music that I play underneath things, and we have advertisers and sponsors and everything, and so you've got to, literally, it's, 24 different channels that you've got to do, all while keeping up with weather and traffic, and oh, surprise, it's 5:25, and the mayor's office just got raided for something, and you have 4 minutes to write that story in 30 seconds. And surprise, there's a mattress in the road, so you've got to tell people in 6 minutes that there's a mattress on 285 and to avoid that one. So live radio replaces the need for coffee. I don't drink coffee, I've never had coffee, but spending one day in live radio is enough to keep you awake for a week. Because if you don't hit the button at the right time or say the right thing at the right time, it goes on without you. And it's really, really awkward when your mom texts you and is like, you missed that. Like, you missed that. It cut off your last word. You didn't hit your time post right. So to disappoint my mom is one thing. But live radio, always fun. And then we also work on longer form stories, longer form features. Yesterday, we work on stories for both local and national shows. So yesterday, I got approved to work on a story for Marketplace, which is a national business show, on the Atlanta Braves' new stadium coming up. So we spend a lot of time out in the field reporting, writing, editing, cutting tape, talking with people on the phone, setting up interviews with people all across everywhere. So it really depends, more like a typical week. A typical week, you're working on some sort of feature. We also do live shows once a month or so. So our next live show is from SunTrust Park when it opens on April 14th. So I'm working on 2 different stories about the Braves. So it's talking to people, getting interview, getting data, getting sources, writing my script, repeating the script 10 times in the edit bay to make sure, because I misspelled baseball and said it wrong, and I didn't like the way that sounded, or that needs to be shorter. So it's a lot of moving parts for both the daily show and just longer form features. And yeah, audio is fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. So I think the thing that I see in common in all 3 of these responses is this idea that you have to have a multifaceted skill set. You have to be able to take the work that you're given and do it well. And sometimes that will be very different than what you were doing yesterday or the day before. So thank you all very much for that.
Thank you.
So I think my next question has to do with the arc of your careers so far. Getting a job in journalism is not easy, but you 3 are proof that if you make the right connections, if you do your work well, if you do your training, you can succeed very quickly. So I want to talk to the 3 of you briefly about your experience in the field so far. What did you do in college that you think prepared you for this? And then what did the first few years, for some of you, really just first few months in this field look like? So let's start with you, Ciara. Tell us a little bit about your arc in the field so far.
Okay, so, well, like I said, my position is kind of unique because I'm associate producer as well as a freelancer, but in terms of kind of getting prepared for my current position, I transferred up to Georgia State in 2013, and I started working for the student newspaper, and I got a lot of great experience there, even though I was majoring in broadcast journalism. And so through that whole experience, I stumbled across my first investigative piece, which I did about RAS being taken over. And so from that kind of led to more opportunities. Eventually, I was balancing basically being a news editor and then going over to GSTV here on campus and being the news director there. And then I got involved with the Georgia News Lab class just by chance, and I joined the class in October, which was kind of like a half semester then. And during that time, I worked on a class project, with Stephen here, and we were basically outlining a bunch of county commissioners. I had never seen a campaign report before. I'd never looked into it, but it's all public knowledge and public documents. And so from that, I basically found that one of the local county commissioners was missing $80,000 in campaign contributions, and that kind of led to two big stories on the AJC and a couple of different pieces on WSB. And I just kind of kept with it, and some of the people at CNN saw potential in it, and they asked me back in August if I'd want to help them on a big national story. And I jumped on the opportunity, of course. And so, and it's a little bit different, but I also feel like my internship at Channel 2, from looking at police reports and stuff, kind of helped with those skills. And that story is still not out yet. It's been over a year and probably 2 years for the original reporters. But, I mean, they saw what they liked, and it's all history at this point. So, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. How about you, Stephen? How did you get to your position at Georgia Public Broadcasting?
So I actually started out college as a political science and music double major. I thought I wanted to do politics, but now I cover it. But a friend of mine who lived in my freshman dorm needed somebody to write a story for him. He was the news editor for the paper, and he was like, "You can speak English well, you know how to write things, I need you to write this story." And so the first ever story that I wrote was actually about, let's see, well, this is gonna be on a podcast, so I need to phrase this the right way. It was a story about a study that a anthropologist had done about fatherhood and whether men who were created a certain way would be better fathers or not. And it was an interesting study, but I found it was a total joke that they didn't need the story written. He just wanted to see what I could write about it. But I liked writing and seeing my name in the newspaper, so I started writing for the newspaper more and more, and then moved up and became the assistant news editor. And then they had me run the student life section, and then I became the paper's first executive digital editor, overseeing social media, photo, video, web, and writing a lot of stories, covering a lot of things. Got to interview the Dalai Lama, got to do a lot of things, and I really liked storytelling, and I really liked journalism as the outlet to do it. And so I was like, great, I'm gonna become a journalism major, and then Emory cut the journalism major. So great, I'm gonna take journalism classes. They cut almost all of the journalism classes, but I was able to take magazine writing and media law, and then this thing called the Georgia News Lab got started. So I was like, that's a journalism class, that's investigative work. So I was in that class for a year, and I spent 6 months profiling one DeKalb County candidate, and then 6 months looking into 4 years of DeKalb County commissioner campaign reports and spending. And I was like, I like investigative journalism, this is fun. But I like doing more than one story 6 months. So when I graduated, or when I was about to graduate, I saw that there was a job at Georgia Public Broadcasting. And I met the host that I work for. She had emceed an event that I spoke at, and I applied and didn't hear anything back, so I called and emailed and called and emailed and called and emailed, and finally, they're like, okay, have a phone interview. Well, they missed my phone interview. They forgot. So I called them, and they're like, okay, well, let's do this now. So eventually, I got the job, and even though I didn't have any audio journalism experience, I didn't work for a radio station, I was a musician and played music, and I wrote for the newspaper, because I had a lot of the skills in reporting, and this is good broadcast writing, and this is what's a good news story, that they saw that potential in me to like, this is how he can help, and this is what he can do. So I did print, I did digital, I did social, and now I did a little bit of video, and now adding audio into the mix. So I didn't technically fit on paper with 2 to 5 years audio journalism experience in this and this and this, but it was the basic journalism fundamentals that I had and the desire to learn more and to tell stories that ended up putting me where I am.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen.
That, and I told them that I had the face for radio in my interview.
All right. Well, then, Rikki, tell us a little bit about how you got your job at WSB.
Okay. So in TV, a lot of people start in small markets. Some people start at the Today Show, but you might need to be the daughter of a president to do that. So I started, I went to the University of Florida, and there I was working at the NPR station. We also had a PBS station, and so I was on air at the PBS station, and I guess on air, do you say on air for radio?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So, and then we went to Guatemala on this trip and told this story about a man who lived there who was rescuing malnourished babies who would have died. And so I think those fundamentals, and then also just building a reel that I guess spoke to at least one news director, worked out to. Your reel is so important.
Can you say a little bit more about the reel? Tell them what that is.
Sure. So a reel is how you'd get your job, whether you're going to work for ABC News or you're going to work at your first station. And what it involves is maybe 30 seconds of what they call a stand-up or live shot montage. So it's pretty quick bits of like, you know, take a look behind me, you can see the tree has fallen over the car or something like that. And the more active you can be in those live shots, that's so crucial. I can't put enough emphasis on how important that is and how that can set you apart. If you're just standing there with a microphone, just talking, looking at the camera, that versus, you know, actually moving and touching and picking something up and doing something, huge difference. So you have that 30 seconds of different live shots or stand-ups, and then you have 2 to 3 different stories. You want to start with probably the story you feel the best about. It needs to be hard, so meaning it shouldn't be, you know, about like a puppy or, you know, bunnies or something kind of, for lack of a better term, fluffy. It should be something you feel proud of. And then the next story can be a bit lighter. And if you're doing 3 stories, always put the lightest story last. And then after that, if you have some anchoring experience, and I'm speaking specifically about a reporter reel, if you have some anchoring experience, you can tack that on at the end as well. And when I started out, everything was done on DVDs. And so I had huge stacks of DVDs as well as, you know, cases. It's not like that anymore. I think you could still send a DVD, but a lot of times you would just send an email with a link to news directors at this point. So, yeah, I would work extra to try to get stories that I felt proud of. And then I went to Huntsville, Alabama, the CBS station there, which is, I think, around Market 80. And then I went to West Palm Beach. After that, I spent 2 years in Huntsville. And in Huntsville, I thought they were so crazy. The first day, they said, "This is your desk." And I was like, I don't know if I even deserve a desk, because I just don't. I didn't say that out loud, but that's what I was thinking, like, wow, I actually get a desk. And then they said, okay, you're going to be the reporter in Huntsville. And then I learned I was the only reporter in Huntsville for the day shift, and that there were 2 other reporters working, but one was working like near Georgia and one was working near Mississippi. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can do this, you know, sort of faking it till I made it, I guess. And we would turn 2 separate stories every single day, and we'd turn 2 separate VOSOTs out of those, so smaller versions, and then I'd write 2 web stories out of that. And so I'd work 12 hours a day easily each day. I'd only get paid for 8. I didn't make enough money to even afford my rent, so then I had to move in with a person who worked at my station. So, and then I worked the morning shift, and then I'd have to be into work at around 3:30 a.m., so I'd wake up around 2:30 a.m., and then sort of my life outside of work sort of went away. So I will say, at least for me in my journey, I have made a lot of sacrifices to my personal life, and sort of even my happiness at times, but what's come out of that is more resilience, an ability to deal with difficult things, an ability to endure and push on. And where I am now, I don't think I could be happier in this type of job than I am now, but I've been extremely unhappy at times. But it's that balance of like, do you keep going or do you quit? And in West Palm Beach, where I went after Huntsville, I did quit after a year, and I am not a quitter. Like one time I was in a cross-country race and I passed out and I should have just quit, but I was like on medicine, on antibiotics, and I got overheated, and I passed out. Like, that tells you how bad I am at quitting. So anyway, yeah, I keep forgetting the question. So then after West Palm, it was just a bad situation. Like, you got to know how to play your cards, you know, and I think what's so important too is to have a support system around you, your family as well as at work. And you don't need 20 people, you just need like 3 good people who can help you through, because being a reporter can be extremely rough. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, and I'm not trying to scare you away. I just want to be real about it.
I mean, I think that kind of honesty is very helpful.
Thanks. And other people have had different journeys, of course. Everybody's journey is personal. So then after West Palm, I went into PR actually for about 6 months, thinking, well, maybe news just isn't so much for me. And in West Palm, too, I was one-woman banding, so I was, you know, it's really hot down in Florida. So you're like trying to look nice as a reporter, / trying to carry a camera and a tripod and interview people and write stories and drive to your location. It was just so much. And unfortunately, the business, at least in my opinion, unfortunately, is moving toward one-person banding more and more. So, like, I just would say, if that's a job you're going to take, just pace yourself, be really good to yourself. Just understand you're trying to do at least 2 people's jobs in one. And that's hard, you know, let's call it what it is. So then after that, I went to Orlando, and getting from PR back into news was a bit of a challenge, and I had heard that, and I was like, PR is not for me. You know, I miss telling stories. I miss the performance aspect. I miss meeting lots of people. I mean, there are a lot of great things about being a reporter. So in Orlando, I was on the morning shift, and it was probably the lowest point in my career, where I was just so exhausted all the time. You know, you'd go live at least a dozen times a day. That's pretty stressful. To go live that much when you're really sleep deprived as well, and you can't think as clearly. And I would try to go to bed, you know, at 6 p.m. And just that was the hardest time for me. But then out of that, I was like, oh, I'm gonna exercise. I'm gonna make that a priority. And then sort of everything opened up for me. And then after 2 years, a lot of contracts are 2 years, some are 3 years. I said, I'm getting out of here. Thank you for the experience and the friendships. And then at that point, I was, maybe this is too personal, but I think it's good to be really honest. I was in a long distance relationship, and I was like, well, I really want to be in the same place as my boyfriend. So we said, where's a good place for both of our careers? And we said, well, Atlanta would be fantastic. So I felt so fortunate. I mean, thinking about trying to go to one market specifically, I had tried to get an agent at that point. I still don't have one, and I was like telling these agents, yeah, I just want to go to this one place, and nobody would sign me on because I mean, maybe there was another reason. They didn't want to just try to target one market,
Right.
You know,
That's
that can be
a tall order.
hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So one thing I really want to say to you guys is, if you're looking for a reporter job, and you know some places you want to go, and you can drive there, try to set up a meeting with the news director, rather than putting it on them to pay for you to come and put you in a hotel and for your flight. Just say, hey, I'm going to be in town these couple days. I'd love to just say hi, see the newsroom, and meet you. By that point, you've already sent your reel and your resume and your information, and you say, I just love to meet you, right? And then it's like no strings attached for them. They don't have to pay for you. They don't have to hire you. But at least for
You've
me,
made that connection at that point.
yeah, and I've always felt you can sell yourself so much better in person than on a DVD or on a sheet of paper, right? Or the electronic versions of those. So that for me has been, I think, a way I've gotten jobs, and I did that here in Atlanta. Hey, I'm going to be in Atlanta this time. I met with the news director. I started at Channel 2 as a freelancer, and then they hired me maybe 6 months ago. So I hope I'm not like scaring you or like this lady's crazy with all this information, but I'm really passionate about wanting to be honest, and also about wanting people to go into the right career, because if you're in a place where you're like, oh no, I hate this, it's going to be so much harder to change, you know.
That's good advice. Thank you. Thank you.
You're
Thank you for your
welcome.
honesty. So now I'm going to kick it over to you all for questions in just a minute here. But before I do that, I want to have our panelists talk a little bit about some of the work that they've done specifically. So each of them has a story that they've brought for us to look at. So let's start with you, Stephen. We've got the story that you have on the All Three Coasts conference.
Yeah.
So tell us just briefly how you got into this story. Was it assigned to you, or did you come up with this story on your own?
So we did a live broadcast of the show from the A3C Hip Hop Festival in Edgewood. We did it from a coffee shop right outside the festival grounds because they wouldn't let us inside the grounds without paying and being a sponsor and other things that make journalism ethics people go, So we did a live show, and my host and I sat down with our bureau chief and sat down and thought about different stories we could tell about the conference or from the conference that would be unique and that would kind of fit in with our skill sets and what we wanted to do. And I actually wrote my thesis on hip hop and social media, and hip hop is a very, very large part of my life and a large part of my experience and passion. So us being in Atlanta, I pitched the idea of kind of walking through or listening through Atlanta's role in hip hop from its genesis to now. And so, refine the pitch. I had to give different voices I would use and how I would walk through and how I would do things, and promising that I would use clean versions of songs so we didn't get fined, and trying to explain and understand that our general listening audience, as well as just people in general, don't have the same knowledge that I do. Like, nobody will ever have the same knowledge of a story that you do. So in working it out, trying to get your level of comfort and knowledge and the average listener and the average person's knowledge and combining the two together. So I could probably sit here and talk for the next 3 days about this subject, but the average person is going to listen to it once, maybe twice, over the span of 4 minutes on the radio. So that's the hardest part about, I think, any story, is being able to get it in a fashion where somebody can get it and listen to it the first time or watch it or see it and be like, I understand. So for this story, did a lot of research, a lot of listening, a lot of, ignoring people at work to listen to Outkast, which is, I think, is a way to go every day. But, so I had to write a script, and which is this long web story, which is my script plus songs that are in there. And then putting it all together, I had to voice it and mix it all together, and then it went through numerous rounds of edits and edits and edits, and I had to get it down to a certain time because we're limited to time. But the web version actually was a little bit longer. So then after that, I had to find a picture for the web. I had to clean up my script, remove all the quotes and lingo and everything like that. And then so now you have the web version and then the link to, can we listen to it? Or
Yes.
Perfect.
West Coast rivalry came to a head in 1995. A duo from Atlanta named Outkast managed to win Best New Rap Group at the Source Awards. While the New York heavy crowd booed, Andre 3000 grabbed the award and took the audience to task.
But it's like this though, I'm tired of folks, you know what I'm saying? The closed-minded folks, you know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and don't nobody want to hear it, but it's like this, the South got something to say, that's all I got to say.
Hip-hop made its way into Atlanta before then, with artists like Kilo Ali, MC Shy D, and Raheem the Dream producing their own take on popular Miami bass music. And Arrested Development even won 2 Grammys in 1993 for their song, Tennessee. But it was Outkast's album, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music, that brought the ATLian funk into the picture. Atlanta's sound was in direct contrast with the gangster rap of the day, pioneered by the West Coast Tupac and the East Coast Notorious B.I.G. After both stars were murdered within the next few years, it was time for the new sound of the city nicknamed the Dirty South to step up.
It's outcast, but the moves I thought you knew, so now you know. Let's go.
Atlanta found its footing over the next few years when record labels like LaFace and So So Def perfected the success of funky, soulful hip-hop like Outkast and Goody Mob. Mixing in elements of hip-hop, R&B, and pop, the Atlanta sound of the 90s began to dominate popular radio stations around the country thanks to artists like TLC, Usher, and Ciara. Lil Jon and the East Side Boys kicked off the early 2000s by making the entire nation dance to Atlanta's music. They accomplished that thanks to a style called crunk, which features up-tempo, bass-heavy music with party-focused lyrics. This marked the beginning of commercial success of Southern hip-hop becoming accepted into popular culture. A prime example of that acceptance is the song Yeah, performed by Usher, Ludacris, and Lil Jon. Not only did it win a Grammy for Best Collaboration, but it made it to the top of the charts in 14 different countries, including ranking number 2 on Billboard's Hot 100 Decade chart. By the late 2000s, even the New York Times noted Atlanta had shifted from the margins to becoming hip-hop's center of gravity, thanks to a crop of homegrown artists like Gucci Mane, whose songs kicked off a new era of rappers bragging about their wealth. With the rise of social media, Atlanta hip-hop was ripe to spread farther, faster, and stronger than ever before. Soulja Boy had the entire country trying to crank that in 2007 with a song and dance that's been viewed 250 million, with a B, times on YouTube.
Soulja Boy, I'm in it. Why me crank it? Why me roll? Why me crank that Soulja Boy? That Superman? That why me?
That's thanks in part to a strategy of uploading his own music to news sites with the files intentionally mislabeled as Michael Jackson, Justin Timberlake, and even Beethoven. You'd be hard-pressed to find a popular song that hasn't been performed or produced by an Atlanta artist, though this year's top hit is done by Brooklyn's Designer, with lyrics, sound, and a cadence that blatantly imitates one of Atlanta's superstar performers, Future. Designer, by the way, has never even set foot in the state.
Panda. I got broads in Atlanta. She's at the lean in the family. Credit cards in the stands.
So with a New York artist copying Atlanta's style, we've come full circle from that night in 1995. Atlanta's journey from a city of silence to hip-hop heaven didn't happen overnight, but it also shows no sign of slowing down. Radio stations across the country give love to the city, and every day it seems like a new artist that's elevated to a household name, whether it's the whip and nay-nay of Silento or the sounds of Gwinnett County trio Migos. As long as there are people listening, the South continues to have something to say. For GPB News, I'm Stephen Fowler in...
So that was probably the most fun piece I've done in my year there. That was also relatively early on in me voicing pieces and finding my radio voice, so I sound a little bit younger than the old, wise 23 I am now. But, you know, there is such a thing as a radio voice, and that was not it. But, you know, that story is a good example of just the sheer amount of work and process and how you're able to, I think at least, you know, if you do the stories that you're passionate about and find a subject and an area that you're passionate about, you can really hear it in the story. Most of the stories that I've done have been arts and culture related. I did a whole series of stories on food because I really like food. I went to Pond City Market and interviewed a bunch of chefs and actually got the sounds of them making their food, and burned off all of the hair on my hand from the El Super Pan where they were frying shrimp mofongo, and he didn't tell me there was a 30-foot flame that he uses to make it, so burned the microphone and part of my hand off as part of it. But, you know, this story, you know, stories like this, you can find the stories that you're passionate about and the voice that you're passionate about hearing from and telling, and I think it really goes into this. But probably for that 4.5 minutes, it was probably 20 to 30 hours worth of work just before editing and scripting and putting it all together.
Thank you. I think that part is very important, that this little 4-minute piece, I mean, you took hours and hours of effort. One thing that I really like about this piece is you select quotations very carefully. So the Andre 3000 quote that you use at the beginning of the piece really sets the tone for how this narrative is going to go, talking about how the South has something to say. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the web version of this piece, you have a quote from Jermaine Dupri, right?
Yes. Well, and also I have Jermaine Dupri's "Welcome to Atlanta" in there.
Excellent.
But yeah, especially with radio and with sound and with NPR, like what you hear and how you hear it is so important to the story.
Yeah, making those selections is really difficult, I'm sure.
And that comes with actually interviewing people as well, but also just in how I deliver it. I mean, my voice was a little bit different, and because the audience of NPR and the audience of radio, you have to over-enunciate Gucci Mane so that somebody understands what you're saying, or at least understands enough that they can get their kids to Google it. You have to be very intentional about delivery and what quote you use and how you use it, and that it makes sense, because oftentimes, unlike TV where there's multiple hours of news all day, or the web where you can just go hit refresh, a lot of times with radio you have somebody for that 4-minute period of time, or part of that 4-minute period of time, and then they'll never hear it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. Rikki, let's go to you. So you've got a piece that you worked on for WSB regarding the wildfires last year, correct?
Yes.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how this story came together? So this is a contribution to an ongoing story, right? I mean, WSB covered this many, many times. So tell us a little bit about how this fits into long-term coverage of an event, and then a little bit about how the filming actually happens. Like, this is so we'll be showing a clip from this story in a minute, but it's filming out in the woods. There's smoke, there's fire. Like that's a unique place to have to film a story. So tell us a little bit about that.
So one weekend, I was assigned to work a story about a fire, and it was sort of the start of the wildfires that ravaged North Georgia for weeks, if not months, and I covered. Yeah, for months, and I covered them, over that span. I was like on the fire beat. And so when you're covering sort of the same thing all the time in different places, like now we're in this county and there's a fire, and now we're in this county and there's a fire, and you never really know the cause a lot of the time. So you have to be creative in how you're gonna cover this story. And so the approach we took in this story is a ride-along. So we were on a 6-wheeler. I did not wear the right attire that day. I'm in a dress with some gold jewelry, so I would recommend that you bring, like if you are in a nice outfit, bring like a polo or something and sort of have that at hand. But anyway, yeah, this is like a ride-along, and I was on the phone almost every day with the Georgia Forestry Service, like, okay, where's your fire today? And it was great as far as pitching stories, because I knew there was always a story there, and I didn't have to stress as much about finding something. And one thing I think I should mention too, which I didn't really talk about, is that we post on social media all the time. So we're always tweeting. So, when we were shooting this story, we're tweeting too in the woods, taking video, taking pictures, and also posting on Facebook. And as far as, do you want me to talk about the video now or after?
Let's watch a clip first.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, on the player, the sound is muted.
Wildfire since Friday.
Now across North Georgia, as we expect dry conditions and record heat again tomorrow.
Firefighters across the state battled 91 wildfires since Friday. One of them is this one, 325-acre fire on Rocky Face Mountain in Whitfield County.
Channel 2 Action News rode with forest rangers as they fought hotspots in Cherokee County. Channel 2's Rikki Klaus is there live. Rikki, the ranger, worries future fires could damage homes.
Justin, he's very concerned because in these conditions, fires can quickly burn out of control. He says brush like this has zero moisture. And let's walk over here. Take a look. You can see firefighters have returned to the scene. They said they got a call about smoke, and they're checking to see if the fire has rekindled.
The stumps were gonna burn for days until the tap root and everything was gone out of them. About 10 acres.
We rode in a six-wheeler with Georgia Forestry Commission Chief Ranger Mark Munns through a forest off Amilu Circle in Holly Springs. 10 acres here caught fire overnight.
The smoke column looked pretty massive.
Munns says more brush is burning since everything's bone dry.
10 acres under these conditions are just as hard to put out a fire as 50 or 60 acres under a normal condition.
Sunday afternoon, it was smoky, even fiery in spots.
This is the worst year I've seen in northwest Georgia.
The Chief Ranger stopped the six-wheeler and pointed to a burning hole where a tree used to be.
It'll burn until every piece of combustible material in that hole is gone.
Plenty of small flames did not concern Munns, but this did. A new fire that ignited outside the fire break. That's the dirt barrier meant to stop flames from spreading. He radioed for help.
There's a small snag down here on the corner.
A ranger and a tractor arrived. He dug a new fire break. Munns says someone started this fire. He's not sure how yet, but he urges everyone to use it as a lesson.
Any little spark starting a fire, I'm afraid we could possibly lose more homes to forest fires this year.
Munns says resources available to put out fires like water are getting thinner and thinner. So he says it may come to a point where they have to ask for help from out of state. A plane will monitor this area until it rains again. Reporting live in Cherokee County, Rikki Klaus, Channel 2 Action News, Nightbeat.
A big job for everyone fighting these fires. Thank you, Rikki.
So tell us a little bit about the experience of being out there in the field. How long were you out there? How many hours did it take you to film that? And what kind of considerations do you have to take in an environment like that? Like, what are you doing when the camera's not on you?
Okay, first question. If I have trouble remembering one question, I'll definitely have trouble remembering two. Okay. Wait, what was... I'm so sorry. I can ask a million questions. Apparently, I can't remember them.
So how long were you out there to film that piece?
Okay, so we were probably out there an hour 15 to an hour and a half.
Okay. And what are you doing when you're not talking on camera? What are you doing on that?
Well, everything, of course, was recorded after the fact. So when you're out in the field, you're interviewing, like I was interviewing the Georgia Forestry Commission fellow. And when I'm interviewing, I'm listening for emotional sound bites or interesting or shocking or anything that prompts an emotion, you know? Because as a reporter, my job's to tell the facts. And I'm also supposed to represent the person in however they're feeling and whatever they want. And those are emotional aspects that I can't cover personally. So I always try to find really emotional bites that speak to what that person wants. And
that's what I was getting at pretty much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And I'm also tweeting a lot.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
What about the videography?
So I think if you all have do we have any video production students in here right now?
Okay,
All
then
right.
I guess it's not as important.
Yeah. All right, now let's move to Ciara. Now, I know you can't speak specifically about stuff you're working on right now, but we've got this story that you worked on for the Georgia News Lab and then later for the AJC.
Yeah.
And you told us a little bit already about how you got to this story, right? It started in the Georgia News Lab and then was picked up later by AJC. So tell us a little bit about that transition. What happened between working on this for Georgia News Lab and it getting published for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution?
So it was a very long process, and like I said before, the stories that I typically work on do last 6 months to about a year or 2 years, and so, you know, like I had said before, we didn't go into it thinking we were going to find something, you know. I mean, we didn't know, you know, we could have searched for months and not found anything. But I just so happened to stumble across this thing, and from that point forward, it was like that was my only focus. I lived, ate, and breathed this story. So it went from everything from going down to the Fulton County governmental offices, dealing with people by myself. That was the first experience I ever had with dealing with some not so pleasant people,
Some
and
intractable
you kind of have
government
to, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to be, I don't know, you have to stand your ground and kind of be like, well, this is public record, so I can have access to it. So, it was just a lot of time researching who this person was, why this might have happened. I am by no means great at math at all, and there was a lot of math involved in this. So, it kind of speaks to what we were saying before about, utilizing a lot of skills, and, just because I hadn't had the background in investigative reporting didn't mean, that I couldn't do it. And so I had a little bit of guidance, with David Armstrong, and, there was a lot of emails, a lot of meetings, and this thing probably took 7 months or so before it was ready to even be written. So at that point, I was having assistance from the other reporters, David Wickert, Jody Fleischer of Channel 2, Ken Foskett of the AJC, and so we all just kind of sat around in a room one day when we were ready to start writing and going through page by page of documents, and what do you have here, and we have this, and and what is important, and Stephen kind of mentioned about the editing process as well, and I think that with investigative reporting, or any reporting, you have a duty to represent the information accurately, but nobody will ever know the amount of information that you know from that story. It will never happen, and especially with these investigative pieces, sometimes there's really kind of interesting or shocking facts that you can't put in there. It's a little bit different because he was a county commissioner, so he's not essentially a private citizen. But, going down to the governmental offices, I actually looked at his divorce records, and that's something that just didn't make it into the story because it wasn't relevant. But, you also have the responsibility as a journalist to be very careful with the information that you have. You're, especially in investigative reporting, I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, we got the bad guy, and it's not necessarily like that as well. You have to stick to the facts and what your angle is. Here's what I found, is it really relevant that I know, how his divorce went down in X year. So, so the other part of your question was you asked about that and how it got to publishing.
Yeah, the process between the two. And so it sounds like a lot, like that was a very collaborative effort between you and a lot of other people to finish putting the story together.
Exactly. And typically, like you, for example, you will kind of pitch a story and kind of go out there, and you'll have help from, the camera people and whoever else is helping you. And it seems like for you as well. But with big investigative projects, it's typically a lot of people working on it, and it will go through an editing process, and legal's our best friend when we're working on these stories, and it's just sometimes you stumble across something and you might start off on it by yourself, but eventually in investigative reporting you'll have a lot of people kind of helping you. For CNN right now, I can say, even though I can't talk about the stories, I can say that the one story that I was originally hired for as a freelancer, there's probably 6 or 7 people working on that. It's on a national scale. And then there are a couple of other kind of investigative data pieces that maybe there'll be like 3 or 4 people working on that. But usually I'm not by myself.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Let's show a little of the WSB version. Bryce, might need you to help me.
Yeah, so this is from the WSB version of Ciara's story.
Right.
Oh yeah, the mute is on again. So right next to yeah, there we go. There.
As I'm concerned, I don't have a discrepancy.
That's what this politician told us when we exposed money missing from his campaign accounts. Now state investigators want answers. The State Ethics Board has filed a complaint and subpoenas against former Fulton County Commissioner Bill Edwards. The board is demanding an explanation for nearly $80,000 in spending. Channel 2's investigative reporter Jody Fleischer helped expose this earlier this year. She's here now with how it all came to light. Jody?
Jovita, this was the product of a student project from the Georgia News Lab, a partnership between Channel 2, the AJC, and 6 local universities to train future investigative reporters. Now, this was the very first story we worked on with the students, and now it's led to an open investigation from the State Ethics Commission. So, just to be clear, there's not $80,000 missing?
No. And
When we first questioned longtime Fulton Commissioner Bill Edwards about his campaign money in March, he blamed an accounting mistake. Now the State Ethics Commission isn't so sure.
It could be merely accounting errors, it could be more serious, but here we're talking almost $80,000 in unaccounted for expenditures, and that's a pretty serious situation.
The state already looked at the records it has for Edwards and saw the same thing we did. Between June and September 2010, nearly $80,000 in political donations vanished from his campaign records with no explanation. Now there's a formal complaint and subpoenas.
If you don't have paperwork to support your campaign-related expenses, then you have a problem.
The state is also questioning nearly $14,000 in dues and memberships Edwards paid to the Swanky Commerce Club in downtown Atlanta.
I think that it shows that there's real results and things can be done.
Georgia State student Ciara Frisbie first noticed the discrepancies after researching Edwards' records online.
I thought that was fantastic.
The new head of the Ethics Commission says with limited staffing, most cases originate with citizen complaints.
We encourage people to do that. We really rely on that sort of citizen action to be able to help us find the violations.
Edwards refuses to show us the one document he says proves the missing money was an honest mistake, but he says he'll give that to the state.
I hope that elected officials are held more accountable for their actions, and I really hope that we get down to the bottom of what happened to that $80,000.
Edwards told us to talk with his attorney about the state investigation, but he did not return my call. If Edwards can't provide an explanation, the state could issue thousands of dollars in civil fines. This could even lead to a criminal case if the state finds that money was intentionally misappropriated. Jovita?
Thank you, Jody. We have more detail.
Well, the funny thing about that too is that he and his lawyer, so that it did lead to a State Ethics Commission investigation and then a hearing, which was, I believe, 2 Decembers ago. I sat in that room waiting for Mr. Edwards and his attorney to show up, and they never did. So
imagine that.
Yeah. So and would not return calls thereafter, and you guys can read a little bit more about it if you want to. Just look up my last name. It's Frisbie. It's really easy.
All right. Well, thank you very much, all three of you. I think probably you all are tired of hearing me talk at this point, so I'm going to kick it over to you and see what kind of questions we've got. Yes?
Hey, this question is for Rikki. Can you talk about the interview process for reporter? Interview process, what did you do to get ready for it, and the types of questions that they ask? If you forget, I'll ask you.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing I think it's good to do, and this is very practical, is you ask them their name and then you have them spell it. And so an example would be, I'm Rikki Klaus, R-I-K-K-I-K-L-A-U-S, and my title is, and then
No, the interview process for getting into the industry. Like when you
okay, gotcha.
No, I was kind of confused about that too.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, right. You do the interview or you conduct the interview. Okay. So the interview process, I mean, it could be everything from, like I was explaining before, hey, I'm going to be in town. Can I come meet up with you? And then they're kind of showing you around the station and you talk with the news director very informally. Or if you get called in, you're sitting at the desk across from them in the news director's room, and the questions you might get could be everything from, well, tell me about yourself, or, you know, tell me about your educational background, or why should you have this job? You know, I think a lot of that is just being good at communicating with anybody, you know, like, to prepare for that, I'd say just start talking to older folks or to strangers and just try to make small talk, to be really confident, to look really nice. So much of it is how you look and how you appear, you know, if your shoulders are back and you have a strong voice and, you know, you believe in yourself, they're going to believe in you. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you got the,
Okay.
you got the answers right, just the questions, what you did to prepare. And,
Okay.
Thank you.
Prepare, sure. And I think, you know, before you go in, just know what you want and know who you are. And something simple that you could do is just look through your resume. Okay, here's where I've been, here's what I've done. They're going to want to know this stuff. And even though it's on the paper, they're going to want me to effectively communicate that so that they know it's real and they believe that this work is going to benefit their station. And one thing that they always want to know is, how are you going to benefit us? You know, that's their main thing, is if we hire this person, are they going to do a good job for us? Are they going to be loyal? Are they going to work hard? All of those sorts of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And mock interviews are great too. I mean, videoing yourself and watching it back. These are the things that are like going the extra mile, and you probably hate to watch yourself on camera. At least I definitely used to, until my voice went lower, and it just took years before I even felt comfortable hearing myself or watching myself and feeling proud. So it's all a process, and I think also it's partly just saying, hey, I'm going to give myself the grace of knowing that I'm not going to be perfect. You know, who's perfect? Nobody. I'm just going to go in there and I'm just going to make a connection with this person, and I'm going to tell them what I'm about, and whatever results happen, it's out of your hands. Just do your part by preparing, knowing who you are, and looking your best, and being confident, even if you got to fake it.
Thanks, Rikki.
Welcome.
Kira or Stephen, do either of you have anything to add to that? Any particular thoughts you have from your interviews, or any tips you can share?
I would say the first thing is follow up, always. I followed up more times than I thought was acceptable or appropriate, and that's what it took. Because, you know, it's one thing to interview for a job and to do well, and for them, you know, you're not the only person they're interviewing. You know, I know a friend of mine got a job because it was two people, and she sent a follow-up email and said, hi, you know, I enjoyed interviewing with you last week. When will I hear about the next steps? And the other person just didn't respond at all. So naturally, they gave the job to her because she was interested and invested in following up. I'll say this. Most likely, there's no harm that can come from following up with a good phone call or email. You know, I enjoyed interviewing with you. I enjoyed meeting the station. I enjoyed doing this. You know, when's the next steps? Or, you know, I look forward to hearing from you. A good follow-up for life in general is really a good thing to learn and a good thing to be able to do. I would say the other thing is really know the position and know what you want to do and know what it is you're doing. You know, going into an interview at the AJC and talking about, you know, how many listicles you're ready to write, like you need to know the type, the outlet that you're writing for, the style, you know, listen to a lot of, you know, if it's radio, listen to their shows, listen to their hosts. If it's TV, watch the channel, watch the stories, watch it, you know, if there's anything that they do or they excel in, you know, understand what it is you're going into. And whether you have a job or not, look at job postings and for what they ask for. We're looking for somebody to cover this. We're looking for somebody to do this. This is the type of stories. And then do your work towards that job in mind, like with your ideal job in mind. You know, I saw a different posting somewhere in California that was like, we're looking for somebody to take a cool music story every month and put it on the air. And that's not in my job description, but that sounds like a pretty cool thing. So I try to do a cool music story once a month on the air. And so kind of shop around different things, because you're not going to be exactly what is on the job description. And the news director or whoever hires you knows that. So you've got to prove what you can bring that's beyond the job description.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really good advice. Any thoughts on that, Ciara?
Yeah, so another big thing that I think is important that I'm now learning myself, I mean, going in, what Rikki said, is going in there and knowing who you are and, just being confident in yourself. It's crazy to me to be 23 and have all of these investigative stories on my portfolio. I mean, it's just insane to me. I never saw myself getting into this, and accomplishing so much so far. But I still struggle, having even just graduated in December, with confidence and like my abilities to do stuff. And I'm constantly, asking myself, like, am I producing enough? Am I doing enough to contribute to this story? And, I think that's just natural. But learning to say, okay, this is me, this is what I can offer, and this is how I'm willing to build towards something that you all need here, I think is important. And part of that as well, I think, is having a strong LinkedIn account. So getting your portfolio set up online. I also have found that it's really important, like when you're sending emails or interning for internships or jobs or what have you, actually linking to your professional Facebook or your professional Twitter and everything else to give a personality to them. I mean, that's so easy for them to use to like actually figure out who you are. And, following up as well is also super important. I think that after I was interviewed with CNN, I followed up with everybody on the chain email that was sent. And, just saying, hey, thanks for interviewing me. I'm really excited to hear if there's a next step to this. And, I'm really, really looking forward to working with you all, And I think that has a lot of confidence as well to it. Like saying, I'm really looking forward to working with you kind of puts that in their court to say, like, okay, you need to make that decision. So,
absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Can I add something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. I just wanted to say that contacts are huge.
Mm-hmm.
So any kind of networking events that you can do, being here today, that's fantastic, doing internships, and be nice to everybody. Be nice to the janitor, be nice to the general manager. Be the person who is positive and kind to everybody, because that goes so far. This is a small business. There are not very many degrees of separation. So if you want to go to a certain market or something, you probably know somebody who knows somebody, and then you reach out to them, hey, I'm applying here, what kind of tips do you have, can you put in a good word for me? And it just becomes an exponential list of people and I think that's also huge. And then the other thing is, if you don't get the job, it's totally okay. Sometimes they're looking for a specific type of person. Sometimes they're looking for a specific gender, specific ethnicity. They're trying to have diversity in their reporters and anchors and all of that. And I remember I applied in Tampa, and the news director said, this may not be your time. He said, it's kind of like casting a play. We have different roles, and maybe the next job will be, more your role. And I was like, okay. And it didn't feel right to me either, so I didn't want that job. I think when you go apply for your job, you need to feel good about it. You need to feel like, yeah, I can see myself here. If you get a bad feeling, don't work there. And another thing too is if they say, hey, we want to offer you the job, we're offering you X number of dollars, we want you to start at this time, say thank you so much, let me go home and speak with my family or loved ones or whatever, because that buys you time to negotiate, to see if you're really cool with this. Don't ever accept right off the bat is my thing. Do you guys agree with that?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good tip.
Thanks.
Oh, wow. All right. We're really jumping off now. All right, so let's go here first, and I'll start working my way around.
Hi, my name is Michaela Newton. I'm a sophomore here at Georgia State. I just had a question about finding your niche, and once you find it, how do you go about applying for jobs and just trying to find your dream job?
Okay, all right.
Well, I can kind of speak to that. So, like Rikki was saying, everybody has their ups and downs in journalism. I wish, and I kind of said this on the conference call before this, I kind of wish that I had more time in student media. I think that, as, your former news director, that's, where you're gonna get that experience to really find out what your niche is and what you're good at. But just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're stuck there. So investigative reporting is very grueling. I'm kind of in my own transitionary period at this point where I'm like, okay, I can bring these skills, but I'm not bound to what I'm doing. I don't have to do investigative reporting forever. My ultimate goal is to eventually end up in documentaries. That's my dream. That's what I want to do. And so I think that student media and college and everything else, 10 out of 10, always recommend it to really find what you're good at, and as well as internships. I know that there's been a couple of Georgia State journalism students who I spoke to who never had any experience on, student media, never did any internships, and now they're kind of graduated and they're like, well, what do I do, with this journalism degree? So knowing that you have the available outlets to you, try to utilize them as much as you possibly can. And, the other glorious thing about being a journalist is that you don't necessarily have to have, and I wouldn't even recommend just having one skill set in the field, you know what I mean? Like you kind of, especially now with the one-man band scenario in employment, you kind of have to know a little, or a lot about, you have to know, what's the phrase? A lot about a little, or
a little about a lot.
Yeah, a little about a lot. So that's what we do. We're scholars, we're researchers, we're sometimes psychologists, we're emotional support for sometimes the interviewees. So so just don't think that you have to have a particular skill set that's very specialized, because it might work in your favor later on to say, I know how to report on this, 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 and this. So
I would say I'm really big on doing what you're passionate about and finding what your passion is. For me, it's storytelling, and doing that in journalism. It's really satisfying to see a story or a feature or something, and see the final product and see, how it comes out and how people respond and react to it. But also, intentionally or unintentionally, the more you do it and the more you find different things and do different things, you kind of get to narrow down into what your passion area is. Some people know right off the bat. I have friends that are sports reporters that as soon as they could dribble a basketball, they're like, I know I'm going to talk about sports forever. And they do that. But other people, you kind of slowly do your way into it, or you do a lot of different stories or a lot of different things, and things keep popping back up. I haven't intentionally been trying to do arts and culture and business stories, but through all the stories that I've done, slowly there are more and more arts and culture, or you pick up on something, or you have more contacts, or you have more connections, or it's easier for you to do those types of stories. And I mean, I've done stories that aren't that. I went to a climate change conference with Al Gore, and everything was completely over my head for the most part. But I did that story, and it helped me realize that that's not my niche. I could be a health reporter, I could be a science reporter, but it would take a lot more work and having to, understand science, which is more than what I can do at this point. So things kind of, it's kind of a process of elimination. I like sports, but I don't think I could cover the sports stories and do the things like that. Science is cool, but I definitely am not doing science. Healthcare school, can't really do that, so we have people, I have our Atlanta reporter is really, really strong on education. He's done stories in the North Georgia mountains, in South Georgia, and Metro Atlanta. He focuses on education, not intentionally, but it's because he has a big subject area and subject knowledge, and the more stories he does, the more capable he is of doing really great educational stories. My host focuses on Atlanta. She's the host in Atlanta, and all of her stories are different subjects through an Atlanta lens. Now, in that case, she chose to be the Atlanta anchor, but the more you do, the more you kind of figure out what you're good at, and the more you figured out what you want. And like, I'm sure Rikki, you've kind of have a certain soft spot for certain types of stories, because you've had, over the years, you've done probably a little bit of everything, and I'm sure you could talk about the types of stories that whenever they come up, you're like, that's my story. Or whenever something else happens, your news director's like, that's a story Rikki can do.
And I think you'll know, actually, and I just realized this after working in news for like 7 years, that whatever you like to read or to watch or consume yourself, that's probably going to be what you like to work on. So, take a week and say, well, what did I watch on YouTube? What kind of news did I read? Do I like reading about terrible disasters? Do I like reading about fashion and beauty? Do I like reading about sports? And then it'll probably be what you enjoy.
Excellent, good, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Cree. I'm a sophomore journalism major here at Georgia State. My question is about social media. Do you guys have a professional account on a separate account, or do you mesh them all into one?
Good question. I'm sure all three of you have something to say about this. So do all three of you have professional accounts that you
Sort of.
use? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's start with you, Rikki, and we'll just work our way down the line.
Okay, this is an enormous topic at Channel 2, social media. And honestly, the way it's presented to on-air talent is that it's just as important as your on-air aspect. And we spend hours and hours a day when I look back, tweeting or posting on Facebook, reposting whatever, versus you're on air for 15 seconds at the beginning of your story and 15 seconds at the end of your story as a reporter. So that said, we're required to have professional Facebook pages as well as professional Twitter pages, and we all have the blue check or whatever next to it to provide validity. And we even have quotas that we have to reach each day of a number of tweets and a number of Facebook posts. And so there's so much of an emphasis on this, I can't even, tell you. And there are even digital reporters now where all they do is produce content for social media, through like these traditional TV outlets or newspaper outlets, not just people who are, like bloggers or, YouTube stars or whatever. So it's an interesting time. It's evolving so fast. And so, did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
So mine's a little different. So I use my personal Facebook account to reach out to a lot of people. And I'm running into a couple of issues with that, but there's also some positives. So when I'm doing an investigation, let's say I looked at a court case and I have to find a victim or, whoever was in that court case and say, hey, I need to set up an interview with you, either on air or on camera or, over the phone. I always put on my social media accounts that my opinions are my own. That's one strong thing, because that kind of takes you away from the professional setting. And I feel like it's very kind of up to the journalist at this point, unless you're like on a contract. And being freelance, maybe I have a little bit more leniency on how I do it. But so the positive is that it gives an actual personality to the person that you're reaching out to via Facebook. And, sometimes they can look at a professional profile and be like, oh, this is fake. Like, why would they be reaching out to me? So, but at the same time and point, I've also had a couple of different people that I've reached out to for investigations at CNN that have been like, you don't work for CNN. And I'm like, yeah, I do. I really do. I promise you. And for an example, I reached out to one guy, and he is like, well, I don't see your profile on CNN's website. And I was like, well, I'm freelance, so I don't have one of those. And he's like, well, how are you going to prove to me that you work at CNN? So I had to send him a picture of my CNN badge.
What a bizarre problem to run into.
But I mean, so you'll run into problems like that if you use your personal accounts for doing some of your reporting. But at the same time and point, I've talked to not victims, but interviewees who have been very open to speaking with me just because they knew that I had a personality, that I was a real person, that it wasn't all like, tell me about this and, whatever else. So, but at the same time and point, I have a LinkedIn account. I can't stress LinkedIn enough. Your employers are going to look at that. You know, Twitter is a big thing. I'm not a big fan of Twitter. I've never gotten on that train. So I think it's kind of up to you unless there's, you know, a professional setting that says you need to do this by this.
Okay.
Yeah,
what
so
about you, Stephen?
I am a huge fan of social media, not just because I did a thesis on it, but I think, especially for journalism, getting your story out more as well as finding new stories is definitely important through social media. I recently made a professional page for it because, so I have a professional Facebook page as well as my personal page because with the political season and everything like that, I couldn't post an article from NPR without like people I went to high school with or other people that I'm like friends with on Facebook being like dirty liberal bias, and I couldn't post news from anyone else without being like stop giving, you know, people would be like stop giving a mouthpiece to hate or stop spreading lies, and it was just, you know, so I was like, okay, you know, on Facebook I'm gonna post pictures of my food and my girlfriend, and on the professional page I'll post all of my links, and you know I have a page set up that clearly says who I am. But Facebook is a great tool, but Facebook is also a giant time suck for getting into arguments with people. So I keep my personal page personal for the most part, because there's always that one person that regardless of what you do, you know, they'll go on there and just start trashing it. And you know, when I'm friends with the CEO of GPB, you know, I don't want her to get on Facebook and see somebody doing this giant thread on something that I posted about how I'm, you know, the enemy of the American people. But, you know, but I do think having a strong social media brand helps as a journalist. It helps people reach out to you. It helps people engage with your stories. I just recently got the blue check mark. I did a little dance. It was my 4th time trying to apply, and this time when I applied, I was like, you literally just gave half of Sesame Street blue checks. Can't you know, like give me a break? And it worked. But you know, that definitely helps. It helps to have the personalities. I think one of the things that is good about local TV journalism is that really, because people see you, or when they listen to the radio, they hear your voice or they see you every day, you're a part of their lives, and you're like in their homes and on their TVs and in their cars. And so social media is a way to like keep up the engagement beyond the 4 o'clock news or like the 4 to 7 show that they listen to. And it's a way to like, you know, I've gotten a lot of story tips from people that'll be like, hey, did you know this building's on fire? And it's like somebody posts a picture, or like there's a refrigerator in the road. Here's a picture of it that I took as I was sitting in traffic behind it. Or, you know, people sending messages on Facebook and things like that is like, here is, you know, here's Trump's tax returns through Facebook Messenger.
No, okay.
I mean, I wish, but not like that.
Right.
But, you know, so social media is a big part because people see, you know, it's like Rikki said, you know, when I host, I'm on for maybe 10 minutes an hour for 3 hours. And the rest of the time I'm posting links to stories or sourcing things or, you know, tweeting about whatever, you know, whatever trending topic of the day is. And that's how people engage with you, and that's how people, honestly, that's how people respect your work a lot more, because they see you're more than just a 30-second newscast story or a live stand-up from outside City Hall, and you know, it personalizes it more. But definitely keeping it professional, even if it's not a professional page, is important, because nobody wants to be that person that gets called in because somebody found a tweet from 2008 where you said that Drake was trash, and they're like, this person can't report anymore because they're obviously biased.
My advice is, from here on out, just pretend like whatever you put on social media, your future boss is going to see. And that could make or break you getting the job. Whatever pictures, whatever you say, you can have an opinion, but I would just look at it through that lens. Because you might not get a job if you posted some picture with a gun or something, or a picture like of you half naked, or, you know, you have to be professional from here on out. Be you, but pretend that that's the scenario.
All right, let's get you, and then we'll move on back.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Jasmine Satterfield, and I'm a journalism student here at Georgia State. And I have 2 questions actually. So the first question is, I have a concentration in television broadcast, so I want to know how to stand out when like applying for television broadcast jobs. Most of the cities that I want to go to are like, you know, in other states as far as getting on-air jobs. So how to stand out when doing those online applications and things of that nature. And my second question is, being in investigative journalism, how do you ever have a fear that someone's gonna come after me? You know, I'm investigating the government or, you know, government officials. Like, do you ever have a fear of, you know, hey, somebody's watching me, or I have to look over my shoulder, or, yes. So those are my questions.
Well, I don't know. You want to address the first question about TV?
And how to stand out.
Yeah.
My ideas are just follow up, like Stephen said, with the news director by sending an email after you've had an interview. But as far as getting to the interview, sometimes they'll be like, just fill out this application online. Even if you call the station, go online, fill out. It's like, how in the world am I supposed to stand out when there are 300, 600 applicants? And that's very common, that there are hundreds of people competing for this job. So the ways that I found are saying you're going to be in that town that the news director's in. Can I please meet you? I've sent you my resume. Also sending the resume again with the real, you know, even though you've already contacted this person, knowing people who work there or someone who knows somebody who works there and leveraging that. And also say you don't know anybody and you can't go to Washington, you know, state right now and drive there or fly or whatever for, you know, logistical reasons or financial reasons. Then finding the news director's email out. So sometimes you kind of have to be sneaky, like you call and you're like, hey, what's the news director's email? And they won't even give it to you. So then you try to find, you're searching online and you find the reporter's emails. Like my email is rikki.klaus@WSB-TV.com. So say you know the news director's name because you've researched online. I'm going to put sarah.johnson@WSB-TV.com. And then when it doesn't pop back, you're like, oh, it went through. And then you keep following up. You be that squeaky wheel, until they answer you. Sometimes most of the time they never even answer you. And that's like the last thing you want. But you gotta do something different because you have a huge pool of competitors.
And then to address your question about being fearful if anybody's ever gonna do anything as an investigative reporter, I feel like once you identify yourself as an investigative reporter and you kind of start going down that path of that's the type of work that you do, I mean, I've honestly never had any fears about that. Maybe I'm just not freaking out about it. Maybe I should be freaking out about it, but it's so illegal for them to do anything to you, so that just makes it even worse if they do something to you, you know what I mean? So I think that the only time that we would have a serious issue as an investigative reporter or some sort of fear is, let's say you go and do a story on a killing or something, and you're following up and you're speaking with family members of the, alleged murderer, and those situations can get kind of dicey, I guess, especially if you're in person with them. So I think in those cases, or at least for CNN, they kind of have security and stuff that goes with you. So you're not just by yourself. It's like I keep saying for investigative reporting, it's very team mentality. So, you're not by yourself. But I don't know. I haven't really heard of any reporters getting like their houses egged or something by like a county commissioner. But I guess we would know at that point, like,
Yeah.
hey, who am I investigating? Who could it be?
So I can actually speak to this a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take much of the panel's time here, but so a lot of my research is in terrorism, and there's a group here at school that does a lot of work on studying ISIS propaganda, and we've written a bunch of stuff, and it's been published a few places, and about 6 months ago, myself and a number of my colleagues got a message from ISIS's digital department, their digital caliphate, saying that they had declared digital jihad on us. And that doesn't worry me on a daily basis. Like, the idea that somebody out in Syria wants to kill me is like a little unsettling, but the work that I do is more important to me than to be afraid of that.
Absolutely.
So I think that's kind of the balance you have to strike there.
The worst thing that's happened to me is that Kasim Reed has me blocked on Twitter, but
He blocks everybody on Twitter, man.
When you're out in the field, it could be any kind of story. There could be people with mental illnesses or people who are just
Right.
mad that you're covering their story that might make them look bad. So in Orlando, I had a colleague and someone came after her with a rake or a shovel, and actually hit the photographer. And then one situation, again in Orlando, the photographer I was with said, hey, lock the doors. You know, it was the early morning hours because this is a sketchy area or whatever. I'm so glad I locked the doors that day because somebody in the dark walked by and tried to open my door. Who knows what he would have done? I mean, I don't know, but it was locked, thank goodness. So there are a number of these kinds of sort of random-ish, you know, things that can happen when you're out in the field. So you just have to be really mindful of what's happening around you. Even sometimes people try to run in your live shot when you're talking. The other day, some lady came up and I'm like trying to focus on what I'm trying to say. It's live TV. And then this lady like saunters up and I'm like, you know, I finally see her and she's like, don't do that. And then she like walked away. Like, I really hope she doesn't come back because some people, you know, can be mentally ill or they could be drunk or they could hate you. And I think too, when, you know, like our president tweeted once, you know, the media is the enemy of the people. And when that kind of mentality infiltrates our society, I think too that allows people to say, oh, they're the enemy. I can hurt them, you know, because they're our enemy and it's justified. So that kind of scares me too.
All right. Yes.
This question is for Stephen. Okay, I was completely blown away by your A3C article and your piece because I actually covered the A3C when I was interning for a magazine. So I want to know, how do you go about putting together a piece related to music, and how do you also go about getting direct quotes from artists and things of that sort? Because it's kind of hard to kind of ease your way backstage when you're trying to cover an event.
Well, so I covered Music Midtown, and apart from ruining clothes because of the mud, they have a lot of festivals and a lot of music things have very particular ways and times and scopes and scales of things that you can do, and like for the A3C one, a lot of the audio, you know, obviously I think it was 2 years old when the Source Awards happened, and Outkast said that, so I found that on YouTube. And you know, the other quotes and things like that, it is hard working with people that are celebrities or in the public eye because they have, I mean, everybody has PR and handlers now. We did a live show from the rooftop of Pond City Market, and I dealt with 8 different PR girls with 4 different firms just for one story. And so dealing with PR people, you have to, it's a special kind of skill to be able to handle somebody in PR because it's an often antagonistic relationship, or they just don't know the answers to the questions that you need to. So a lot of it is having contacts, a lot of it is knowing who to talk and who to talk to and who to, you know, reach out to, following up again, but also just being persistent with personality, because you know, you just have to constantly, with any sort of celebrity or any sort of person, you know, even trying to schedule the mayor to come in, you know, it's been about 4 months of trying to wrangle a sit-down time for an interview, and so it's just a lot of patience and a lot of persistence.
The 2 Ps. All right, so let's start working on our second row. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alyssa, and I'm a journalism major, 2 classes away from being a junior. My question is for Cara. I'm taking an opinions writing class, and we are focusing a lot on investigative journalism and how it's kind of to where, like you say, it's 6-month projects or 2 years. So it's not very many journalists that are even pursuing investigative journalism. My biggest question for you is, like me, I'm an independent worker. I'm not really the team, like let's all write one thing. So how do you work with between 3 or 7 people on one story that you have to write collectively? How does that to where you can still convey what you did and what they are all offering?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I will go ahead and forewarn you now, there will be tensions on these projects. There will be clashing personalities. There will be, I think we should go in this direction because this seems the most important, but, later on down the line, you're like, well, I found this piece of information, and obviously, this is like key to this investigation right now. So it's a lot of balance. Between all of that, and like you said, there's not a lot of people who really kind of want to go into these investigations and do them. They're grueling, and I think that the other concern too is that when you're working on this, especially with team members too, you guys kind of get like tunneled in after so long, like, you get so hyper focused, and then, you have to come back and kind of step out of it, and I think that helps too, is like, with my colleagues and stuff, sometimes at the end of the week, I'm like, we did a lot of stuff, we should go and grab some drinks and just kind of step away from it too, because I feel like with that being said and being able to take yourself away from it, and after being tunneled for so long into research, I mean, you need it, especially when it comes to kind of darker subjects. I worked on during one of my internships at Channel 2 with Jody Fleischer, I worked on a story about police officer involved shooting cases in the state of Georgia from 2010 to 2015. And I spent probably 8 hours a day while doing research, going through death reports, GBI case files, so on and so forth. So it gets pretty dark. It's not so much, political sometimes, depending on where you're working, but just being able to, just doing a mental check, being there for your colleagues as well, and then understanding that there is going to be some tension, but not to scream and yell at each other when things get really, really angry and stuff, or, really stressful, I think is probably the best.
Wonderful. And I had a really quick question for Rikki as well. I know you just came back. I appreciate you being so honest.
Thank
Your
you.
honesty really reflected everything you said. I do appreciate that, because it's not for the ill-hearted. So just kind of setting people up for that is good. Sometimes people can have a persona about people who are on TV and in the field of broadcasting, and it's not very realistic. There's a TV show, and it's like, I think it's called Being Mary Jane, and I do love that show, but it's just, she's talking about, I have millions of dollars, I have a school in Africa for young girls, and it's just, people, when I tell them that I'm a journalism major, they kind of assume that, that means you're gonna make X amount of money, and that's not really realistic, because, I'm not in it for the money, because that's not very realistic. So I wanted to ask you, based on what you said, about, they usually give you a 2 or 3 year contract. So what kind of pay do they offer when they're giving you a 2 or 3 year contract with a news channel?
So for an entry level, I'm not so sure anymore, but I'll tell you what I made when I first started. So it was back in 2009, so it's been a while too. But I made $25,000 a year, and my next year I made $26,000 a year. I was really homesick, so I kept traveling home to Florida, and I said too, like, I still want to get healthy food, so even though it costs a lot more, I'm going to prioritize those things. And that doesn't go very far. $25,000 a year when you're living in your own place and trying to, make your own rent. And another thing to think about is that you have to have specific clothing. You can't just wear what you wear to class, and that can be kind of expensive. So just for at least the ladies, I would say go to Ross. Like, Ross has great stuff. Wear solid colors, wear colors that are good for you, and just try to be really frugal at the start. Don't spend more than you have, and make the changes you need to. But then it got so much better. I mean, each year got so much better. And one thing too is it's just a lot about, how much experience do you have, because I'm sure I don't make anywhere close to some of the reporters who've been there for, 20 years at one station, and I shouldn't, at least according to the way it is now, you know? Even though we do the same job, perhaps. At my first station, there were people making a lot more, and I thought, this is so unfair because I'm working harder than them. I'm doing more stories than them. It's more stressful, like my position as the daytime reporter. But anyway, it's not fair at first, and I don't think, if you're trying to get into it for money, I don't think you'll last because you don't make good money, especially at the beginning. But then there are people at my station who are reporters who I'm sure are doing very well. And if you're an anchor, you can make a lot of money, from what I understand. Like, I don't know how much our anchors make, but, you know, they're not doing bad.
Eventually you get that Monica Pearson money.
Yeah, or Jeff Moore.
All right, yes.
Hey y'all, I'm Marissa. I'm a senior here, and I'm focusing on broadcast journalism. Super interested in getting into reporting. I was at 11 Alive interning past summer. I'm at WSB now. I haven't had a chance to work with you yet, but reporting is hard. Journalism's hard. It's long hours. It's just mentally exhausting. I mean, even if I'm at the station and I don't go out on a story that day, I almost think just the environment sometimes is just overwhelming. But I want to know through y'all, like, what is the most rewarding part of your job?
Well, for the nature of my work, I think the reason why I gravitate so much towards investigative reporting is because I know that I'm working on something that nobody else has. Nobody else has done it. You know, they might have done something similar, but this is new information or something very serious that like affects a lot of people, and it's really about informing the public. You know, I don't do it for myself. I don't do it for the recognition of myself, although having a couple of bylines is great, you know, but it's really, in investigative reporting, you kind of have to have that mindset that I'm doing this for the people, you know. And I feel like journalism overall is kind of, you don't worry about yourself. Yeah, it's mentally exhausting. So taking the time out to kind of focus on yourself. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I've after 5 or 6 o'clock, I shut my phone off, don't answer emails and stuff. So I think that helps, kind of, and yeah.
I would say, you know, it's also for me, it's the little things, you know, people, you know, nobody's sending me emails or sending me tweets for accurately running the show and accurately doing the newscast and accurately hitting all the buttons and, you know, doing all the things. But it's the little things, you know. It's the little things where somebody was like, you know, thanks for the thanks for that traffic update. I'm glad I missed that. Or somebody's like, thanks for doing this story on, you know, this music program on the west side of Atlanta. Thanks for doing this. You know, the one person that does, you know, people don't necessarily appreciate it when things go well. So, but it's, you know, but it's the slight little extra things that really do it. You know, nobody's like, oh man, you hit that post exactly. That was a brilliant, 1-minute 45-second newscast. You get 3 stories in there. You hit all the tape, and I understood every word you said. Nobody's going to do that. But it's the little things that people do, you know, like, you know, we did a promo earlier this week for a story that, you know, of course, now that I'm going to talk about it, I forget what it was. But I used a really, really subtle, clever song choice, and somebody actually tweeted out, like, okay, like, I respect NPR playing this song underneath that. I see what you did there. You know, just the little things like that make it worthwhile. You know, when you're at the end of a 13-hour day and you filed 3 stories, and you know the traffic is haywire and you hit the wrong cue for something. You know, but somebody's like, nice music. You know, that makes it worthwhile. You know. When people are like, you know, thanks for your day in, day out coverage, thanks for doing the story, you know, even just the one person, you know, when I interview somebody, or, you know, when I went to this school on the Westlake to do the Atlanta Music Project, you know, a parent was like, you know, thanks for talking to my 7-year-old son, you know, he was so thrilled he heard his voice on the radio. That can carry you through a lot of days of, you know, people calling you garbage, or.
Yeah. For me, it's when you do a story and you give an underdog a voice when they're going through a tough time and they've called all of these governmental departments. They're getting nowhere. You tell their story, things happen, things change. It's amazing, the power of media. And so to use that for good, to help people, to inform people about, say there's a recall and they were going to eat that hamburger tonight, but instead they're not going to. Just those little things of, to me, the public service of journalism is what keeps me going. Along with, if I didn't like writing, I could not have stayed in this job. Like, there's gratification for me every single day in just writing my story. I don't know, I hope you guys like writing. There's a lot of writing involved. But yeah, just making someone's life better, or making them more informed, or inspiring them, putting that out to thousands and thousands of people, giving them hope. All of those things keep me going.
That's good. Thank you all for that. It's hard to stress that when we're teaching these classes, like that there are these benefits and these outcomes of being a journalist that are more hard to quantify. But I think that all three of you really got good examples of how this job can be very, very fulfilling and actually make you feel good. We've got maybe another 5 minutes or so for questions, so we need to put this into rapid fire mode. Yes.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a senior at UGA and also interning at Channel 2 right now. One of the things I am struggling with the most is finding that authoritative voice and tone for packages and being on air. Do you guys have any advice of how you found yours?
It took me years because I used to have a really high voice. And even when friends always joke, especially if they kind of are just meeting me, they say, "Whoa, you have a reporter voice?" And I heard it, and it's so much deeper, and it doesn't sound like you. And then when we're talking just as friends, it's higher. Or if I get mad, the reporter voice comes out because it is a little bit lower. So if you can just, I guess, practice trying to bring the octave down. I mean, listening to you, it doesn't sound like you have a really high voice or anything like that. But also I think it's partially just listening to news stories. I would listen to females' news stories so that you can get examples. And then you start to hear the cadence of how they speak and what they emphasize. And I just think naturally by exposing yourself to a lot of news stories by females that maybe you'll adapt better. Because I thought, well, this is my voice and I shouldn't have to change my voice. But the thing is that if you sound more authoritative, if you, punctuate the right things, then you're more effective. And that's what you want as a reporter, is to reach more people. If it's annoying to hear your voice, click, So, yeah, I would do that. Listen, and then also just mess around with your own voice and see, can I sound like this? And maybe even record it on your phone and listen back and just, work as time goes on with story to story. Okay, here's what I'm aiming to sound like. And don't expect to sound like what you want to sound like at first. Like I said, it took me a long time.
Yeah, I have about 30 minutes or more of different tapes of me just sitting in an edit bay practicing, but also, just different things of, the quote-unquote NPR voice or the radio voice of, you are listening to 88.5 GPB Atlanta. I'm Stephen Fowler in for Rikki Bevington. Over and over and over again, trying things, trying really, really low, trying a normal voice, different things. And, people will say, when they've listened to me on air, they're like, was that really you? But really, it's kind of, it's theatrics too, it's kind of like, especially, it helps in radio when nobody can see what you look like. But, just sitting there reading the news stories, just really getting into it. It's like you're acting, you're playing a different part. You are badass, authoritative person delivering the news, and it just kind of, it comes out in your voice. But yeah, there's about, I have a file that's about 30 minutes of me just saying my name over and over and over again in different voices, different pitches, different things, imitating different famous NPR hosts, different people that I know. I tried one day where I talked like my dad, and it didn't go well. It sounded like I was lecturing the news. But lots of practice.
All right, who else has a question? Yes.
My question is about either starting off in the beginning with your intern, or as you've developed, what kind of softwares you've had to learn to be able to do the one-man band.
Good question.
Your job.
Not
to pretty much for everyone.
Yeah, so Stephen, let's start at the end with you. What kind of audio software have you
So
had to pick up?
I use Adobe Audition. In the station, it's Audition 1.5, which is almost as old as I am. But I use the Adobe Creative Cloud. I'm familiar in Audition, Audacity, Hindenburg, which is a journalist thing. I'm familiar in Final Cut, Adobe Premiere for video, Photoshop for editing things for social media, and then we have our own, like the back end of the website is, also familiar with like some coding stuff.
Remember how we've been talking about diverse skill sets all morning long? Yeah. Ciara, how about you? Have you had to mess with any database software?
So yes and no. So a lot of what I do is a lot of data entry as far as my position. So like actually grabbing it's a very tedious process, but sometimes I have to like read a report and then type it into an Excel sheet, and then that's later, processed in other forms. I know that my senior producer on the data team was trying to show me how to use things like SQL and a couple of other programs. So if you're planning on ever using data, which I highly recommend, it makes your stories a lot stronger too, even if you don't want to go into investigative reporting, like having a basic understanding of why you use those and kind of how to use those, I think is good. The more skill sets, the better, and I mean, with every organization, they've got their own separate ways of how they upload stories and edit them. At CNN, it's called CMS, which I'm just now learning. But most of the time, just having a basic understanding, and then asking your employers or your managers too, like, hey, I don't really know how to use this, so is there some sort of like training session that you guys do? And that's always a positive. So, I mean, that's what I did with CMS. So, yeah.
So you have a technology person in-house that you can go to and say...
We've got a whole department for it at CNN, and I think that's one of the benefits of working at like a larger kind of organization. They can afford to have it, but taking that time to do it yourself, maybe self-teach is also good. So, yeah.
Cool. And Rikki, how about you? Have you had to mess with video editing software, especially like getting your demo reels together and everything?
Yes. So at each different station I've been at, I think they've had different editing, software. So Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, Avid, and the list goes on. So I used to use Final Cut Pro when I worked in the West Palm market and was a one-woman band. Also, like, we use iNews, but there's also ENPS, which is where you input your scripts and where producers create the rundown for the entire show. And then we use something called Videolicious to create like tease videos, and that's just on the phone. And then we had another workshop the other day from a social media guru, and he gave us a whole long list of all of these other apps to download. So it's just, everything's changing so quickly, but I think if you know like one video editing system, you can kind of do them all once you sort of like get some training, Same with the cameras, different cameras at each different place. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are about to break for lunch. We're going to get into small groups, so all of you will have an opportunity to interact with the journalists that we brought in. Got time for one more question before we break. Yes.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I have a question about investigative journalism. I was wondering how you can tell that a story has meat before you spend all that time investigating it, and also how to get good, credible sources, how to find them.
Okay, so that's kind of a loaded answer. So sometimes you are going to knock it out of the ballpark just by chance, kind of like the Edwards story, and then sometimes you're going to spend a lot of time doing a story and it's not as big as you thought it was going to be. And I think that I take that a little personally because I invest so much time. So you never really know, but I think that developing that instinct as an investigative journalist, when you know that something just isn't right, you should probably follow your gut with it and investigate. And I mean, I'm constantly learning how to like get the information and like how do I do this, and like thinking outside of the box to do that and to be able to follow those leads and go down these rabbit holes to find the pot of gold at the end, I guess. But So sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but usually if there's that feeling, follow it. And then Credible sources. So sometimes you'll have to use, I mean, with the Edwards story, we talked to the State Ethics Commission, obviously, like the head of it. You know, he's pretty knowledgeable in investigating politicians, right? I think just like kind of, I'm still learning, you know, on a national level now. I'm working on a lot of more national investigations, and I don't really know. So sometimes I'll go to my colleagues and be like, hey, have you ever spoken to this person? Or do you, like, ask questions, you know? And if you don't know right off bat, you can always talk to somebody that you were initially going to talk to, and they can refer you and just be like, oh, actually, you should probably talk to this person. And going back to being nice to everybody, I mean, I had to kind of learn that. I was very, like, cutthroat, and Bryce can kind of speak to that, too, when I was news editor at The Signal. But I've had to learn to tone it down a little bit, so just ask questions, you know, and I think that will lead you the way, and if you don't know it, your colleague might know it, or something else, yeah.
All right, good advice. Well, thank you to our 3 panelists.
And our moderator.
Yes.